Hello, everyone. I'm just thrilled to be here and introduce this next conversation. And I want to say really quickly how phenomenal this past 2 days have been, and just give a big heartfelt thank you to Social Innovation Summit and the team. As Kim said, my name is Jamie Sears. I lead community impact and corporate responsibility for UBS in the Americas. And our purpose at UBS is to reimagine the power of investing and connect people for a better world. And we all know that a better world is one that's more equitable. And so the focus of our work is really to advance inclusive economic growth and opportunity. And that leads me to today's conversation about shared ownership, giving employees a stake in the value that they help to create. And I'm so delighted we're going to be hearing from an incredible leader, Pete Stavros, co-head of America's Private Equity at KKR. He spent 10 years testing this model of shared ownership, which led him to founding Ownership Works. And he'll be joined by my colleague and friend, Jennifer Gabrielli, the co-head of Private Wealth Management at UBS, and a force of nature. And I can verify that that's on her business card. Jennifer's been a steadfast advocate for all we do as a firm around social impact and innovation. And with this effort in particular, to ensure that we were really running to be one of the first firms to make a commitment to support Pete's vision and Ownership Works, to amplify their mission and do everything we can to support their success. So we're going to start with a video, and then Pete and Jennifer will join us on stage for their conversation. Thank you, and this is Ownership Works.
Imagine you wake up on a random Wednesday in the middle of your life, and everything that you've ever wanted to do in your life you can do now. All because you came to work and you did things the right way, and someone held up their word to you.
All right, this is a little different than when we normally get together. Anybody want to have an owners meeting?
We do have some news to share, and the news is we found a new owner for the business.
Pete Stavros is here. He is the co-head of the private equity firm KKR.
I mean, the performance of the company and the growth in value was astonishing. This is beyond our wildest dreams in terms of how well this business performed. It is a huge collection of lots of little things that the workforce did. Again, they did it. They earned it. Made this company more than triple, almost 4x their profits. And so shouldn't everyone participate? That's the simple philosophy.
So, logical question would be, what does this mean for you financially? Because you're all owners in this business. You guys ready to get into it? Even our newest colleagues are going to get a meaningful payout of $20,000. Well, if you think that was good, hold on to your hats. If you joined last year, the payout is $40,000. So for this cohort, the payout is 1.5 times annual pay. So the average payout is $70,000 for this group.
I was shocked. I was standing next to my nephew who just started. I remember looking at him and hugging him and
This is 2.5 times your annual pay. 3.5 times, 4.5 times, 5.5 times your annual pay. For this last group, the payout is 6.5 times.
It's truly emotional. Like, I've never seen anything like it in my life.
The excitement, the tears, the goosebumps, the just sheer excitement. Everybody was in shock, honestly.
First thing is, we're prepaying for financial coaching for everyone. We want to make sure that you guys understand your payout, understand your tax situation, you know how to invest the money, and it gets put to the best use possible.
Still can't believe it. I mean, but it's good to know that you work for a good company and put your time in. They do help you out as well.
Where else have you seen this many men and women hugging, shaking, crying, you know, sharing stories of how we started out here, what we do every day coming into this company to try to make it better for everybody.
It brings the extra oomph to every person that works, knowing that they're owners. Workmanship, you see everything's gone up. Just other companies need to do this.
Every cent that we get back, we earned.
I've never had anything like this happen to me in my entire life. This is life-changing for everything.
I wish that every company could see what this has done.
Every dream that I've ever had in my life I can do now. It doesn't just change life. It's going to change the whole community.
So Pete, that clip is a powerful introduction. I still have chills from watching it, and it's not the first time I've seen it. I'm sure everybody in the audience wants to know a lot more about that specific situation and the details around the CHI experience. But I want to take a step back, and I want to lay some of the foundation that brought you to today. When we first met and talked about Ownership Works, what was previously called the Center for Shared Ownership.
Embarrassingly so, yeah.
You told me about the influence that your dad had on your thought process and his experience as an hourly worker, and how that kind of led to some of the initial thoughts around shared ownership. And then you went on to pursue that in your academic career, and then in your professional career, you've used it as a little bit of an incubator to try it out, see how it works. And that all culminated in March when you announced the beginning of Ownership Works, in full force. So can you take that step back here for everybody and tell us a little bit about the personal journey and the lessons that your dad taught you?
Sure. So thank you for having me, and thanks for doing this. My dad was, as you know, a construction worker, so he was a construction worker in Chicago for about 40 years, earned an hourly wage, which about 60% of Americans do. He didn't begrudge being a construction worker. Actually, I would say he loved his job. If you were to meet him, he's this like stereotypical construction worker, huge man, tan all the time, loves to be outdoors, working with his hands. What he didn't like was trying to build wealth for his family on $15 an hour, and then the massive misalignment of incentives that hourly workers have. So if you're an hourly worker and that's the only way you're paid, you want more hours, your employer wants fewer hours. You want overtime as long as it's scheduled in a fair way, and your employer wants no overtime. So that, I would say, slowly drove my father insane. And he used to talk about the need to work steady. If you're an hourly worker and you work too fast, your hours go down, your paycheck follows. And if you work too slow, you'll get fired. So that need to just steadily work throughout the day and not have an incentive for productivity or quality or on-time delivery or customer satisfaction was what drove him nuts and why he always dreamt of profit sharing. So I'll maybe give you one kind of kitchen table story, but there's millions of these. They used to pay for my dad and his colleagues to drive to the job site and to drive home. And that hour there and back, mattered over the course of a week, those extra hours. They slowly took those hours away. And then they took the lunch hour away. And again, if you're making $15 an hour, that starts to become a problem. And so what my dad and his colleagues protested, the union protested, and nothing really happened. So what they did was they organized for all of the road aggregate, my dad was a road grader, to be delivered right at the lunch hour. So that when the road aggregate trucks showed up, my dad and his colleagues would say, wow, it's such a shame, it's lunchtime, and we don't work at lunchtime. So they would refuse delivery of the material and intentionally run the job out of material and shut the job down. And so my dad would come home and say, I'm like a grown man. This is what we're doing. I can't believe this. And there were a million things like that. So it was all about, I need alignment, we need alignment. This system is not working on many levels.
Yeah. So ownership is obviously a part of the model and a big part of the model, but it's beyond that, right? You also talk about employee engagement and education, and there's a bunch of other pillars that really create the whole package. So can you talk a little bit more about those aspects and why they're important?
Yeah, we've done this about 25 times over 12 years, and we're learning every time we do it. One of the things we've learned is if you just roll out ownership, it's not going to change the culture, and it's not going to make people feel cared for, respected, trusted, because first of all, they won't understand it. The first time you roll it out, many hourly colleagues like my father have never owned anything, certainly didn't own any stock, didn't have much interest in finance. And there are generations of mistrust between hourly workers and management. So day one, it's like, I don't understand it and I don't believe it. So it takes relentless communication, education, financial literacy training, and then using ownership as the foundation to build a culture on top of. So things that we've experimented with have been inside of engagement worker voice. So how can you delegate decision-making rights to workers in a way that you're not handing the keys over, but in a way that feels safe to CEOs. So one of the early things we do is we say, we want some charitable work being done on behalf of the company, and we'd like the colleagues to choose. So in this example at CHI Overhead Doors, we sent home, many were not on email, didn't have phones, so it was a large Amish community, so many don't use phones. So we sent home with everyone's paycheck a little survey on where would you like to see us invest $1 million a year in the community. There's a large military veteran portion to the workforce, so they chose Homes for Our Troops, which was what they really wanted to get involved in. They got way behind it. So then from there, we take the CEO up one step and we say, what if we put $1 million a year of CapEx decision-making rights and we put it in the hands of the workforce? And then you kind of build up from there. People feel like, hey, I'm being listened to. They're seeing their decisions being manifested inside the company, and all of that starts to build culture. And then you mentioned financial literacy training. I think lots of good people trying to do work on financial literacy. I think it's not working. We're not really making a lot of progress. We've done this over and over and over, and you typically get 3% of employees to take you up on the offer for free financial coaching help. It is more impactful at a big event like that. So we did financial coaching work for years at the company, and we'd get 3% every year, would do something. But when people fall into $300,000, $1 million, you get their attention, and they say, I need help. And so we have, at exit events and at big dividends and distributions, we've had more luck. But it's all of this stuff taken together that has the workforce say, this is different, I care. And that's when you see engagement scores go up, quit rates go down, and cultures change.
Yeah, prior to that event, if they don't understand it, they don't value it. But part of the video that you all didn't see is when you're handing out envelopes with paperwork about how much they're going to get, it gets very, very real very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Education becomes important. So we saw this success story. It's one, as you mentioned, of many. But you're really thinking about this as a blueprint for industry innovation. So how do you take 1 or 2 or 3 success stories and really scale it into a movement?
So this is why we started Ownership Works, and UBS is our outside of my wife and I, UBS is our biggest funder. We've got now 60 organizations around the table. And what we wanted to do when we created Ownership Works was we wanted balance from a societal perspective. So it's at private equity firms and public companies and banks and McKinsey and Deloitte and Ernst & Young, but it's also pension funds have a seat at the table, CalPERS, Washington, New York Common, a lot of the biggest, ILPA, the big organization of pension funds and LPs. We have worker advocates at the table, so we have President Obama's head of the National Labor Relations Board, the guy who ran Amalgamated Bank. We work closely with the guy who ran the SEIU. We've got Andrea Dellendorf, who runs United for Respect and sued KKR over a transaction once. So we've got a lot of constructive tension, and this is about trying to figure out the best way to do this. I hope this isn't coming across as like, well, we know how to do this. This is incredibly difficult. We are in the 3rd inning of figuring out how to communicate these programs, how to build culture, how to do all of this stuff. Financial literacy, we definitely haven't figured out. So the other aspect of this is getting people to work together and share best practices and experiment and try different things. We've tried rolling out the equity programs with every form of equity you can imagine, every different communication style you can imagine, and we're still figuring it out.
Yeah, you've got a lot. It's an impressive roster of folks who have signed on to support and advance the mission. And I think, if we talk a little bit about scale, right? I think it's 19 of your fellow private equity firms have signed on, and their commitment is to put 3 of their own portfolio companies into the program in pretty short order by the end of 2023. That's very soon. So that's going to bring real scale to the mission. How have those conversations go? How are they advancing and helping you really support this? And I'm sure your dream is bigger than 3 by 19. So how are you thinking about the longer term?
So maybe to touch on the last part first, the hope is that we can build $100 billion of wealth for working class families in the next decade. And if you look at Federal Reserve data on household wealth, that would be like epically transformational. The bottom half of the country, not just in the United States, but if you read the book Capital, every developed country in the world, there is no wealth at the bottom. So we've got huge aspirations for what this could be. The reason we started private equity, aside from the fact that this is a world I know, is it is an effective decision-making apparatus. So if I can get my partners on board, we have 1 million employees. So to compare it, I helped Harley Davidson, a public company, roll this out. We didn't have a stake in the company. The CEO just called and said, this seems interesting. And we spent 6 or 9 months together. I presented to the board multiple times, and we had a steering committee, and it was a lot of work. And 4,000 employees got ownership, which is amazing. It was awesome. We were thrilled with it. But one of these large firms has 500,000, 750,000, 1 million employees. So if we're really going for big numbers, that's what we need. In terms of how the conversations go, I would say initially, whether it's with an investor or a CEO, there are deeply held misconceptions about working class folks like my dad of they'll never understand it, they'll never get it, they don't need equity, all they want is cash, they can't move the needle. I wrote a page on our website, which is common objections and rebuttals, because obviously we have a different perspective on all of that, and I've lived both sides of it. But once you break through some of that, and one of the reasons why storytelling is so important, obviously, is it's these videos that I think bring to life that somehow it's become normal for people to work 50 hours a week and be in absolute poverty, and sometimes rely on federal assistance. So I think the storytelling is a big part of people getting on board with it.
Yeah, absolutely. The wealth creation numbers are tremendous. They'll actually be great for my business, so thank you for that. But in addition to that, I think one of the standards, you're just starting, and it would probably be really easy to be influenced by people around you who may want you to structure it differently or do it differently. I think one of the things that you said early on that really stuck with me is it has to be a meaningful grant at the beginning. It has to matter. And it can't come at the expense of other things. So you want to talk a little bit about how you envision the program and what's meaningful for these employees and what people are committing to, what the firms are committing to when they embark on the program.
I'm glad you asked this question, because oftentimes I'll talk about this and at the end people will say, it sounds interesting, but I don't like the risk shift onto the worker. Because if you look at the history of ESOPs, which are great, I'm in favor of anything that puts ownership in the hands of workers, but the failures of ESOPs when they have failed, United Airlines, et cetera, and Tribune Company, there's a bankruptcy and people lose their retirement because they've risked their retirement through the ESOP. So our standards are, just as you said, anyone making below $100,000 cannot invest in the business, must be exclusively a free benefit. It can't be a trade for wages or benefits or wage increases. You have to do employee engagement work, financial literacy work, and you've got to give a meaningful amount of equity. So we want to see, if there's a management equity program, we want to see 20% for below the second level of the organization, or at least 6 to 12 months of someone's annual income be in play. If you hit, this is equity, it's not a guarantee, but if you hit your base case returns. Some of this has come from mistakes we've made and mistakes we've nearly made. I'll tell you one really quick story, which a CEO almost convinced me to allow hourly employees to invest out of pocket. And the CEO said, I know my people, you got to trust me. I need everyone to be committed and write a check. It can't just be free. So we opened up a solicitation period, and a truck driver showed up with a brown bag of $12,000 of cash, which obviously was alarming. And what the HR team did an investigation, and the truck driver had run around town and taken personal loans to invest the money. And so we said, this is why we didn't want to do this. So we shut the whole thing down, and thank goodness we now have some standards. We've either, like I said, stepped in potholes or very nearly did. And I think we've got a program now that works and is safe and is not asking workers to give anything up.
Yeah. So we've spent a lot of time on what's the benefit for the employees and how you've structured it. But I think it's important to make the case that social impact is not necessarily at the expense of the organization and the corporation, right? We're trying to build stronger workforce. We're also trying to build stronger companies. And there are some great stats with CHI.
Yeah.
So do you want to share some of those just to show how value really can be created when those incentives are aligned?
And I would maybe offline would love to hear how they think about this. But when I first started talking about this, I ran so fast to productivity, which here we made 10 times our money on this deal. This is the best deal we did since we bought Duracell in 1988. Margins, EBITDA margins, so our core profit margin metric went from 20%, which for a building products company is good, to 35%, run rating at 40%, which is a software company, basically. And they're making garage doors. And so I used to run so fast to that, and then I heard myself talk about it, and it's like, you feel like Milton Friedman again, where if we give poor people like a little chance and a little piece of the equity, we can get richer. So I very much struggle with how to talk about this.
Yeah.
And so we make a bit of a two-handed argument of if you're a hardcore capitalist who just doesn't give a damn, this is great for you. And if you're a do-gooder who doesn't care about money, this is also great for you. But I think it's tricky.
Yeah, well, we're just about to end, but we have a room full of do-gooders, right? Everyone here really wants to make an impact. So if you could leave them with one thought or one thing you want them to do, what would it be? How can they help?
We have so many smart people and so much money working on climate. We have not enough people working on the social side of sustainability. I think this is a really tangible way of moving the needle. So I would love it if people would, if you're an investor, consider the model. If you're an executive, consider the model. If you're a board member, ask your C-suite about, can we broaden ownership? I believe as a society, we are massively misappropriating resources by overpaying, and I work for two CEOs. CEOs, do you remember the old Laffer curve in economics of tax revenue and marginal tax rate? There's probably something equivalent that shows CEO motivation and compensation, and my suspicion is it increases for a short while, and CEOs are more motivated, less likely to quit. Money really doesn't motivate any of us long term, so it flattens out, and then I suspect it declines because CEOs get risk averse, because if you're a CEO with hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, you just don't want to screw it up. Right. So I think from a societal standpoint, our economy would be more resilient because people who need the money will spend it, and really wealthy people don't need more money. They'll just invest in it. It won't help the economy. And I think we'll have better corporate performance. I think we've proven it. Again, a garage door company that's got better margins than a software business.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete.
Great. Thank you.